Welcome to the Tech Today podcast. It's your host, John Mayetta. We published a couple of notes over the weekend, Fed related. We also published one that's more technology related. On the Fed side, uh, one of the notes was about unrealized bank losses, which we've talked about on the podcast and we've written about for the past month or so. And if you look at the FDIC numbers for Q3, the FDIC publishes these quarterly numbers around bank unrealized gains and losses. And over the past number of quarters, it's been the commentary has been about losses because the banks obviously have suffered losses on their fixed income holdings as the Fed has increased interest rates, given the inverse relationship between interest rates and bond prices. And so, I've talked about unrealized losses over the past several weeks in the vein of this will be a reason why the Fed will continue its bank term funding program. And that's why it was started in March of this year. And that's why I believe it will be renewed in March of 2024. However, if you're Powell, Fed Chair Powell, and you're thinking about pulling back or not renewing the bank term funding program, or perhaps he may want to renew it and then yank it in June, at the end of June. If that's sort of your thought, if you're Powell, then you need to rectify the bond problem. And how do you rectify the bond problem? Well, what you do is you lower interest rates. You lower interest rates dramatically, inflate bond prices, and now the banks no longer have such massive unrealized losses on their balance sheets. 684 billion was the number at the end of Q3. Bank of America alone had 132 billion of unrealized losses on its balance sheet, given that it has more exposure to the consumer than the other big banks. And so, there are a number of reasons why the Fed is going to lower rates. I think first and foremost is the mountain of Treasury debt, the 34 trillion in Treasury debt. You just can't carry a Fed funds rate with a 5 handle, given 34 trillion in debt outstanding. So the Fed was always going to lower rates in 2024. It's just that perhaps the unrealized losses issue is the reason as to why the Fed may lower rates sooner rather than later. Perhaps that's the reason why Powell several weeks ago was saying we're not even thinking about lowering rates, and then last week, he pivoted his position. So maybe it was the unrealized losses issue that sort of spooked Powell and the FOMC into just taking this more dovish stance. So that was one. The other one I have to check here that we wrote that was also Fed related was around QT, and just going to pull up the number. So we've talked about the overnight reverse repo market as it relates to QT also for about a month now. The way to think about the overnight reverse repo market, that's a place where, that's a Fed facility whereby banks and non-bank institutions that have excess capital can park that capital overnight. So think of it as a way for banks and non-banks to earn a return on their excess liquidity. And so that overnight reverse repo balance peaked on December 30th of 2022 at 2.6 trillion. And that number has been coming down pretty steadily ever since. And as of Friday, the number was at 683 billion. And so if you just kind of follow the trend line, that balance could very well be at zero by January of 2024, sometime in January. So what will the Fed do when its overnight reverse repo facility is at zero? And if that's a proxy for liquidity, is the Fed going to continue with its quantitative tightening program while there's limited excess liquidity in the economy? Because QT, in my view, is the more important lever that the Fed has to controlling monetary policy, more important than its Fed funds rate. And so the money supply continues to shrink as a result of QT, as a result of the Fed no longer being a big buyer. And because the money supply has shrunk over the past number of months, that along with elevated prices, the less liquidity in the economy plus elevated prices are the two reasons why I believe we're in a recession, and why I believe that recession is going to become more pronounced in 2024 and become a real recession that everybody can feel, and that there'll be no disputing it, no spinning it, that we're in a recession. So keep an eye on that overnight reverse repo balance. The New York Fed publishes a number each night, so you can see what that is. And our technology article, I'm going to cover that in another podcast that has to do with our comparison of Jeff Bezos to Larry Ellison. The contrast between the two speaks to some of the work we've done in prior years on the CEO rater side of the business. That's all for now. See you next time.